Yes.
Welcome into the latest edition of the Inside Carolina podcast. This is On the Beat Live, coupled with the game plan. Got plenty to talk about this week. Johnny T-Shirt's our sponsor. Let's get it. With the game plan and On the Beat, that means Gregory Hall, Greg Barnes, and Jason Staples joins us again. It's been a couple weeks or a month or so since Jason's been on this one. Let's start. I thought we were going to do a dual show like we've been doing, but we're not going to spend much time on basketball given the news that Virginia Tech has some issues. Greg Barnes, what's the latest on that? And where does it stand with Carolina going forward, I believe, to BC on Saturday? Saturday.
Well, BC was one of the first teams to kind of get caught up in this recent stretch of games that have been affected. So Carolina likely will be in good shape for that game. Although, if there continues to be enough players that pick it up, or at least coaches that get it for BC, it could continue to be an issue. This is one of those things where before the season started, the ACC took a hardline stance of, look, if you're not able to participate in a game, you're getting a forfeit. It took one game being postponed, and that was the Wake BC game, for the ACC to completely change their plans. And now it's a situation where, if a team has a minimum of 7 players and one coach that's available to play, if they have that number and they don't play, they get a forfeit. But as long as they have that number and can play, they will play. If they don't have that number, they're not saddled with a forfeit. So that's a change that just occurred a couple of days ago. And then, of course, today, right after the news broke that the UNC's game against Virginia Tech, as well as 2 other games, would be postponed, the ACC followed up with, after the CDC as well kind of changed their guidelines, to now the quarantine times are much shorter. And basically, once a player is asymptomatic, they've got to have back-to-back negative tests, and they're eligible to come back to play, where before it had been 7-day quarantine and then a negative test. So we're at least shortening the windows of these quarantines, which should help more games be played. But the way things have kind of been peaking the last couple of weeks, we're not out of the woods yet, but these changes certainly will help.
Let me ask you this, Greg. As far as the ACC, I knew as soon as they changed the rules off of forfeit that we'd start seeing games, and a team in particular wasn't very surprising to see them have issues. But what is the policing of this? Is there any policing of this 7-player, 1-coach rule? And quite frankly, how could they police that? And why even have the rule, given that I don't know if they even could police it if they tried?
Well, there's no policing from the ACC level. And it goes back to, if you think back to the 2020 football season, because of the financial implications of not playing a season, the ACC, and because of what we saw with the Big Ten and the Pac-12, the ACC wanted to be sure that we played a season. In order to do that, you couldn't put all these guidelines in place on teams to provide punishment when, in theory, they're doing the best they can to play. And so the ACC very much was like, this is how we're going to try to do things. We want to play as many games as possible. But if you're not comfortable as a program or as an institution, then we're not going to punish you for it. And so the ACC has really taken kind of hands-off approach ever since then. And so with a little bit more of a guideline in place, they're hoping that addresses some of these issues. But if a team or a coach decides that it's not in his best interest and he can use this as an out, they're going to do it. I mean, it goes beyond COVID, right? I mean, if there's a way to bend the rules to your advantage, a lot of coaches are going to do it. And, if you've got 2 road games and they're tough games and you've got some issues and you can take advantage of it, go for it.
Is there a policy to reschedule games? So here was our Christmas vacation week here in the Ashley family. Had Hurricanes tickets tonight. That got postponed. Have Virginia Tech tickets on Wednesday night. That's been postponed. Got a lot of money in those because lower level regular price tickets are ridiculous in the Smith Center. And also have bowl responsibilities on Thursday. Obviously, the bowl game's a different story. We'll talk about that. But Greg, what are the rescheduling guidelines? Have they announced those? Do they have a plan, or is it just postponed indefinitely?
No, it's just a matter. I mean, they came out with the modified version a couple of days ago, and it's basically the same thing that they're going to do what they can to reschedule the games, and that's pretty much it. If a games cannot be rescheduled, it will be considered a no contest. And that's pretty much the extent of it. And then it gets into you're having 7 available players and a coach, that aspect of it. But I mean, that's pretty much it. If you've got 2 teams that need to reschedule, you try to find a window where it works. We dealt with this last year, and so they'll do their best. But as we saw last year, some teams, it didn't benefit them to reschedule, and so they didn't. And that's how North Carolina ended up playing out of conference games against Marquette, and who's the other one? Northeastern, maybe.
Yep. Did you say Marquette?
Marquette.
Marquette.
Did I say Marquette? I may have said
Did say Marquette.
Marquette. I like that.
Where did
Marquette.
we? Hey, it got them Dawson Garcia. It's
right.
Hey, this guy's important. All right, so no Carolina basketball this week, possibly at BC this weekend. We'll talk about that more if that game happens. But let's get it to the game at hand. That is, as of right now, on the schedule. Gregory Hall. Bring me in here, South Carolina, North Carolina. I did see a tweet that said South Carolina was missing a couple coaches and a defensive starter from practice today.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting. But your take on this ball game, I mean, in the wake of all these cancellations, I feel like we're talking about a game that may not happen. But if it does, what's important on Thursday?
Well, South Carolina, someone asked on the boards to try to give a rundown on who South Carolina doesn't have. They don't have Zaquandre White, their starting running back, who averaged over 6 yards a carry. They won't have Kingsley. I'm going to butcher his last name, but their edge rusher, Kingsley
Enagberry.
Enagberry, there you go, who's got 45 pressures, according to Pro Football Focus. Comparatively, Tamon Fox leads UNC with 27, right? His numbers not necessarily translate there as far as tackles for loss and sacks. He's got 5 and 2.5, but still he's putting pressure on the quarterback and not making it easy. And then Jason Brown, their normal starting quarterback, entered the transfer portal. And they only have, at least at practice today, only had 2 available signal callers. And the starter will be Zeb Noland, that former graduate assistant that used his last year of eligibility this season. So, yeah, and then I think there's a myriad of other guys that kind of some backups, role players, depth guys that South Carolina doesn't have. Similar to UNC as far as not having a guy like Kyler McMichael. They just have more of those guys out for South Carolina. So, matchup-wise, it just was really important and kind of doesn't necessarily matter, hasn't been affected, is Sam Howell in the passing game versus South Carolina's coverage. Jalen Foster, if I'm not mistaken, is second-team All-American safety. He's played in the box, at free safety, and in the slot almost evenly. So he'll be all over the field. He's got 5 interceptions. He's second in the nation interceptions. So that's kind of where that battle hasn't been affected because UNC has Sam Howell and South Carolina has Jalen Foster, and they've got Cam Smith at corner, who has 7 pass breakups, and he's got one of the highest coverage grades on Pro Football Focus in the Power 5. But the other side, UNC's run defense versus South Carolina's rush attack, has been affected. So that's just kind of what I'm looking at as we move forward here in the next 3 days.
Man, could you imagine if Carolina was without 4 starters last year? What I wonder. I digress. Jason, how does this affect South Carolina's defense? Clearly, losing a guy like Greg pronounced his name correctly is a big deal to them. But South Carolina's been pretty good on defense this year and has had some good games. Does Carolina take advantage of that specifically, or is it just sort of they're going to do what they're going to do and attack South Carolina as they would have if this guy was playing?
I think they're going to mostly attack as they would have. The biggest difference is that I think this allows Carolina to be more balanced. And that's the thing. If you look at South Carolina on the year, like you said, they've had some good performances. I mean, the blowout of Florida. Who else was the big one that they won? They beat two ranked teams.
They beat Auburn. That helped them. But
Auburn, that's the other one.
Wasn't a big one.
Yeah, but at the time that was a pretty decent win. You look at what they've done, and they've been able to put together some good games, but they've been not so good at stopping a run on the year. And when they've given up decent rushing yardage totals, they've not been competitive, basically. If teams have been able to run the football on them, they basically had no shot. I think they're 0-4 in games where opponents have rushed for over 200, and 1-6 when opponents have rushed for over 180. So whereas I think they were undefeated when they held teams below that. So I mean, you think about what they've done defensively. They've got a good pass defense, and if they can keep you from being balanced, they can cause you problems. So I think that's one of the things that if you're Carolina, you're coming into this game and you're saying, okay, the core thing against this defense, the way that they've looked this year, is they've given up some rushing yardage, and when teams have been able to take advantage of that, they've consistently been able to beat that defense. That's where that comes from. That's where your success is going to come from. And that's been true for Carolina too. When Carolina's been able to run the ball, they've had a ton of success because they've been able to be balanced. So I think that was going to be the plan coming in. I think that's going to be the plan now. I do think that the absence of some of these guys and that one in particular, those are going to make things a little easier on Carolina in that respect. But I don't think it changes what they're planning on doing.
Jason, since we're talking about South Carolina's defense, Clayton White had a lot of success when he was at Western Kentucky. He's a 3 times Pearls Award nominee, which that kind of speaks to what he's done. I mean, this is his first year kind of doing this. NC State guy, by the way.
Yep.
But one of the things that as one of the interesting points about him coming into the season, I heard this a lot from some of my South Carolina buddies, is with the 4.25 that he runs. What's unique about it is that he actually has the pre-snap reads set by the secondary, not by the linebackers, and how that allows the secondary to shift coverages quicker, and it makes it easier for them. Is that a rare thing, or is that just kind of window dressing and it sounds better than maybe it is? What's the benefit of doing something like that if it's a big deal?
I think it's probably less of a big deal than some folks might talk about in that respect. It's not nothing though. And it reminds me some of what Gary Patterson did at TCU, where their defense, they split things, in half the field so that they had more coverage flexibility and things like that, where one safety would call half the field, the other safety would call the other half. And then he actually had it so that the secondary coverages were detached from the front. It's a different way to do it. It gave them more flexibility in terms of some of the things that they could mix and match, and it could look more exotic at times than it was in terms of being able to teach it to your defense. But all in all, from the coaching perspective, you're still having to signal the same things. It's just a matter of who's making the call. I do like it in today's game that you're having your safety who's going to be out there probably the most, making those calls and being able to do it from back to front. I think modern defense has to be played back to front, so that you're not put into positions that are disadvantageous. So, I mean, I think there's some benefits to that in the sense that, your safeties can kind of see the whole formation a little bit easier, and it puts them in a position to be able to do more. But I don't think it really matters that much in terms of, what it's going to do for you as an offense or anything like that in terms of the way that you're going to be able to attack or whatever. I don't think once the snap happens, it's going to make that big of a difference.
Greg, let me ask you about Carolina's rushing attack. British Brooks is the shiny new nickel after his performances at Wofford and NC State. But Ty Chandler has been the man all year. Folks should be healthy by now that have been out hurt. Do you see Longo using Brooks as extensively as he did against South Carolina as he did against NC State, assuming everybody else is healthy? Chandler, Caleb Hood possibly. He was great against NC State, but he wasn't the guy all year. How do you see that working out for Carolina?
Yeah, I guess it really just depends on how well British has looked in practice. But you have to remember, I mean, British has been around a long time. And so they've got plenty of practice film on him over the years. And I know they're a little bit surprised with how well he looked against NC State. I think we all were. And if that carries over, well, then sure, maybe he's earned a few more reps. But I mean, Ty Chandler's the guy. And I think, a key point of why this offense was able to find its legs, if you will, on the ground was because of what Sam Howell did. So there's room for multiple guys to get snaps. And I think like what we saw against NC State is they were willing to go with a hot hand. And so I think Ty Chandler certainly will get the starter reps. But if he's ineffective, then maybe British is number 2 on the list to come in and give him some options. I'm more so than this game. I'm interested to see what kind of impact he can have in the spring and early next year, because while they got some really young guys who have flashy stars beside their names, it's a very inexperienced group. And so I think British may be able to make the most move in the offseason leading into 2022.
He has 18 missed or forced missed tackles so far on 26 attempts. Like that I saw that today looking at PFF data. That's insane. It's like almost 0.7. It's like almost averaging 0.7 missed tackles per snap or per attempt, whereas like Kenneth Walker leads the country with missed tackles forced, and he's at like 0.3 per attempt. Which obviously
it's like a Javonte Williams type number.
Literally, it's crazy. I didn't realize. I mean, obviously, like watching him, he's running guys over, but I didn't realize he had been attributed 18 missed tackles forced. It's a pretty large number.
Did you see how many of those were against NC State alone?
10.
So my question on that, everybody keeps asking about the offensive line, and one of the questions from the chat is about the offensive line is, where are those missed tackles? Are they 4 and 5 yards down the field? Are they in the backfield? Don't they track that too as well?
Are you saying
where do they occur?
Oh, like where British is breaking tackles?
Yes. Like where are those tackles being broken? Because Jason, wouldn't that to discuss the offensive line, wouldn't that be a function of the offensive line? If he's trucking guys 5 and 6 yards down the field, offensive line did their job. If he's having to break a tackle in the backfield, a little bit different. Where do you stand there?
Yeah, I don't think PFF makes that easy to find, and I'm not sure they actually post it. I mean, I think they actually keep track of it, but I don't think it's something that's accessible. But yeah, it wouldn't make a difference. I mean, if 3/4 of your missed tackles are because you're, dodging the first guy in the backfield when you're taking the handoff, that's pretty significantly different than if you're, 2-3 yards into the hole, 4 yards down the field, making a guy miss to go from a 4 or 5 yard run to an 18-yard run. Those are different things. From the perspective of the running back, I mean, it really doesn't matter. You're still, you're making a guy miss either way. From the perspective of your offense, it makes a heck of a difference, huge difference. So I think from what we saw against NC State, it was almost all downfield. I mean, it was stuff that was, line of scrimmage and beyond. I mean, they generally did their jobs up front pretty well in that game. in Wofford, of course, was mostly downfield as well. I mean, they didn't get a ton of penetration in that game. So, I mean, I don't think it's a situation where it's a matter of the offensive line has not done their job. Therefore, he's had to break those. It's that he's made plays when plays have been there to be made.
Tommy, the closest we have is PFF and their rushing direction report. Like UNC as a team, they've got them at 6.6 yards per carry, and they've got them at 4.0 yards after contact. So using that metric, on average, they're getting 2.6 yards up the field before contact. Of course, it doesn't necessarily happen that way when you're talking about averages, but that's the best we've got in terms of being able to isolate that kind of number. In British, for example, is 8.6 yards per attempt and 4.8 yards after contact. So that's even further up the field. That's right at 4 yards up the field before contact.
Jason, what's the sign of a good of an offensive line effective run blocking? What number of that?
I mean, that's a hard thing to answer for a couple reasons. One is you might just say, well, look at yards before contact, right? I mean, it's the offensive line's job to, get a guy into the hole and get him downfield. And then, the way that we always did it, coaching high school ball, what we used to tell our running backs is, it's their job to get you the one-on-one, and then it's your job to win the one-on-one. That's what most running backs coaches tell their back. Like, look, at a certain point, we're going to get you one-on-one with that first tackler. It's your job to beat that guy. It's their job to block these guys. It's your job to beat that guy. So, statistically speaking, you say, okay, well, yards before contact, but the reason I say that's tricky is yards before contact is also a function of vision on the part of the running back and the ability of the running back to set up his blocks. And I think we saw that the last couple of years with Javonte, right? I mean, how many times, and as good as Michael Carter is, and you look at, he's had a pretty good rookie year. I mean, that guy's a really good player. As good as as a player as he is, think about the number of times that Javonte would come into the game, particularly in the second half of games, and all of a sudden it looked like the holes were just gigantic. It's like, well, why weren't those holes there earlier? Well, actually, most of the time they were. It's just that Javonte had a way of finding them and hitting them at exactly the right time, with exactly the right pace, from exactly the right angle, to make it look to make what a normal running back might make look like a half a yard crease that he's barely fitting into. Javonte sets the block up and plants and hits that hole, and all of a sudden it looks like a 4 yard chasm, and it's exactly the same. You could watch the same play being blocked the same way for two different backs, and because one has just elite next level vision and the ability to pair that vision with his feet, he makes all of his offensive linemen look that much better. So they're doing their jobs, but he makes it look like they're really doing their jobs. And as good as Chandler is, and Chandler's a guy, he's a finisher. He's got great speed. And this has, been the thing we've talked about all year with him. You get him into the open field and he's gone, right? Major big play threat, major threat out of the backfield with great hands, can run routes, and a good overall runner, but does not have great vision. He's not a guy that just sets up blocks and does a great job making his offensive line look better than they are, right? I mean, it's kind of like having a point guard who makes everybody around him on the offense look better because he's just seeing stuff that other people don't. Chandler's not that. He's physically amazing, an amazing back, but he's not Javonte when it comes to vision. So you might say, okay, well, clearly the offensive line hasn't been blocking as well for Chandler as they did for Williams. But then how much of that, because you look at the, yards before contact feature or number, and you go, oh, they didn't do as good a job. Well, then you go, but they're exactly it might be exactly the same line, blocking exactly the same way, but one guy is actually making that big of a difference even in the yards before contact. So statistically, I don't know that there's an easy, reliable way to do it. You just kind of have to proxy it. And you say, okay, here's the yards before contact. Here's the yards before contact across like 3 running backs that get time. And, here's how that shakes out. You have to look at it more than anything. You have to look at it on film and say, are they getting guys blocked, and are they creating seams within the scheme where guys should be hitting them? And I thought Brooks, and the thing that really stood out about him in those last couple games is he flashed vision where he hit some things at exactly the right time and exactly the right spot with great acceleration. And it looked like he had more space to run than Carolina's had most of the year. And I think some of that was a function of him having really done his job in terms of the vision part and tying his feet and his cuts to his eyes the way that he should have. And that was a big factor in his success as much as anything else in those games. So I don't know that the offensive line necessarily blocked better, but I think Brooks set them up really well in those 2 games.
UNC obviously leads the ACC in rushing yards total, 220 a game, right? You break it down. Someone in the chat mentioned excepting like great offensive line run blocking, right? The rushing attack's been great. Yes, Sam Howell kind of does some of that on his own with scrambling and things like that, but still, Mac, when offensive line gets brought up, and we talked about on the nice or naughty list, right? Run blocking, offensive line, great. Pass protection, not great. But in the red zone, looking at run blocking, or not run blocking, but just situational stats, and when UNC does in the red zone, they average over almost 6 yards a carry in every other 20-yard zone on the field except the red zone. And in the red zone, they average 3.3 yards per carry. And then talking about specific to South Carolina as far as matchups here, South Carolina defensively in the red zone is one of the best teams in forcing opponents to settle for field goals. 130 FBS teams here. South Carolina is 127th, or I guess 4th in field goal percentage. 37% of times opponents settle for field goals. UNC has the highest offensive field goal percentage in the ACC in the red zone. So if they can't get the ground game going in the red zone, they're going to be settling for a lot of field goals on Thursday. And as great as the rushing attack has been, that's where it's been lacking. And I think that's where fans get frustrated as far as, and we've seen it multiple times, they've got 3rd and short, 4th and short, and they can't get a yard or a couple yards. And South Carolina is going to make them pay on Thursday if that happens again.
Greg, let me ask you about British Brooks. One more question about him before we move off of this, and I guess it's related to the offensive line too. If British plays, and I'm looking back, I know what hindsight is, but if British Brooks played like he did against NC State in the Orange Bowl last year, Carolina wins that ball game, or very likely does. He looked like a completely different player in games 11 months apart. Why?
Well, I'm sure the coaches are asking that same question. And
is it on the players? Is it coaching development?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, all that plays a role. But I think Mac summed it up best when he said that for whatever reason, what happened against Wofford provided British with a lot of confidence. And maybe it was the fact that he went into the state game thinking this was going to be his final regular season game against a rival. I mean, he's from Gastonia. NC State means a lot. That's the textile capital of the world, for those who may not know. And he felt it. And, yeah, I think all of us were surprised at how good he looked. But, that's one of the things. It's easy for us to sit here and kind of point out, hey, he looked different. I mean, even the coaches are like, I don't know. Like, he looked great. Like, if he could do that every time, he could be our starting tailback next year. It's just one of those things, one of the joys of the game.
It's crazy, the difference. Go ahead, Gregory.
The Central Michigan or Boise State just had to pull out of that Barstool Bowl on New Year's Eve, and then they just put Central Michigan in the Sun Bowl. So a little quick same
Good
day
for Central Michigan.
turnaround
Good for
to
the
go.
Sun Bowl.
Sun Bowl's in El Paso, right? Hasn't UNC
Yep.
played in that?
Yes, 2016.
So I guess they were about to travel to Arizona for the Barstool Bowl, and now they're going to El Paso. So that at least
I
somebody
think they
found
were. I think I saw where they were actually already in Arizona.
Oh, they were already there?
I believe so. Yeah,
Well, that's even crazier for them to be like, all right, well, we want to play.
they want to
So,
play. Yeah,
that's
give them
awesome.
credit.
Fun fact, even though it wasn't the first opt-out, why is the 2016 Sun Bowl relevant, Gregory? Oh, you were still in high school. I forgot.
I don't know. They played Stanford that year, didn't they?
Yeah.
Wasn't
Who
that
opted out?
Didn't Myles Garrett absolutely destroy Carolina?
No, that was Solomon, whatever his name is.
Wilcox. Yeah,
Christian McCafferty opted out of that bowl against
That's
Carolina.
McCafferty?
That's
Is that
right.
What you, McCafferty?
McCaffrey.
Is that what you said?
whatever.
Yeah.
Marquette, McCafferty.
Yeah, it's
We're
Christmas Eve.
limping
is-
into the new year here, guys.
really, this week does not count.
I just
right?
said Solomon Wilcox as well. So yeah, we are limping.
Solomon Thomas or something. What was his
Yeah.
name? I can't remember. He ran Mitch Trubisky.
Solomon Thomas. Yeah,
He
Good
he
Lord.
ran Mitchell Trubansky all over the field.
including on the
Too
final
funny.
stretch there, right? Yeah.
Wait, what? I'm trying to remember. What was the thing that the one announcer called Trubisky?
I can't even remember. Those dudes.
I
are
remember.
brutal.
I remember one play-by-play guy got his name completely wrong. I can't remember what it was though.
Trubisky. Look, let's talk about the quarterback that's currently playing. I think we all agree we're kind of surprised or not surprised, or I'm a little surprised that Howell played, but given the fact that Sam Howell's from Charlotte and like he said, basically mimic Daz Newsome, he said, I'm a ball player, I play. Jason, what do we expect to see for the game plan for Sam Howell against South Carolina? Will it be any different given that it's a bowl game, given that it's his last game at Carolina, given that it's, what do we expect from Phil Longo and staff on a game plan for Howell?
Given all of that, I would expect it to look basically like it has. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you start to try to adjust things and do things differently because it's a last game or whatever else, first of all, you're typically not going to be as successful. And second of all, in my view, you're more likely to get a guy hurt because, you're playing sort of it's the guys that are playing, that are playing not to get hurt, that are more easily going to get hurt, right? You have to play this game with a level of aggression and violence and all of that to be able to actually stay healthy. I mean, that's one of the paradoxes that anybody who's played the game will tell you.
You can't play scared.
Yeah, you just can't. And if you do, you're going to get hurt. So, and I think the same thing goes for scheme and everything else. I mean, you talk about this with your player and you say, look, if you're gonna pull off on this, you need to step away, because I'm gonna call this the way that I normally would. And you need to make sure that you're ready for that, because if we do it any other way, then that's going to be bad for the team and also ultimately bad for you. So I think it's going to be that. I think it's going to be the same thing they've been doing. You're going to see Sam tuck and run, and he's a ball player. He's gonna make the plays as he sees them. He's gonna hold on to the ball at times longer than he should. Sometimes that's going to turn out really good with big plays. Other times it's not. So that's going to be what we're going to see. I don't think it's going to be any different than it was before.
Greg, is it safe to say, based on kind of how Mac was talking, I guess that was last week, that this will be less about the future and more about the now on Thursday, whereas last year it was like, all right, let's see who we can like replace with the opt-outs and whatnot, and kind of like when we were talking about this bowl game last year, we were talking about like, all right, let's see what this team can put together moving forward. But I feel like Mac is kind of honing that back and being like, no, this game is very important to us as far as winning right now. It just feels different than it did last year. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I agree. And, I said last year, I thought the fact that the team made it to the Orange Bowl was an incredible accomplishment. And win or lose, that was something they could hang their hat on, and that would be beneficial for recruiting and for program building and all that. Whereas I think this year, to your point, they need a win to keep the momentum going. You don't want to go into the offseason with a losing record. And I think when you combine that with the fact there's some key seniors on this team, there's Sam Howell on this team, who, as I've said before, Mac has really highlighted in front of the camera and behind the camera of just how critically important he was for bridging this gap from the Fedora era to where we are now. So I think there's a incredible level of respect within the coaching staff for what Sam Howell has meant to this program. And so I agree with you. I think there's a lot of reasons for this game to mean an awful lot for this entire program. Sam being a key part, but also you got to get to 7-6. You do not want to have a losing record in here. You want to be able to continually build, and finishing the season on a high note after what happened against NC State, I think is very important.
There's also Tamon Fox, and someone asked if this is the first game. This is the game that Des Evans gets his 1 sack and added at me. This is the one game I'm not rooting for Des Evans to get a sack, because that'll take away from Tamon, and Tamon's 2.5 away from Julius Peppers, and I think that would, or not Julius Peppers. No, yeah, Julius Peppers. For second.
Is he that close?
Yeah,
he's that close to the second.
He's at 28, and Peppers is at 30.5. Greg Ellis has the lead at 32.5. So like, if he has a crazy game, I think his career high is 3 sacks in a game. But I mean, he could at least get to Peppers. So
what were you doing? What were you doing in early September of 2016, Gregory?
Early September of 2016, I was in my
8th grade?
first month of senior year of high school.
Oh,
Okay. All right.
Okay.
That was Tamon's first game. So he's been
There you
around a
go.
while. He's played a little bit longer than either Ellis or.
I was going to say, he
Julius.
played against Georgia, didn't he?
He did. He looked good in that game. Yeah.
Come on. I can't even remember. Wasn't Nick Chubb there running back?
That was
Good
Kirby's first
gracious.
year.
I guess I would have
That
been
is
working on my UNC application September of 2016.
Wow. And you were in the 9th grade?
Random
you were senior.
aside, since we're doing all this stupid trivia. Tommy, do you know who South Carolina's running backs coach is?
Oh, it's Montario Hardesty.
Yeah.
Tennessee. That is that was one of the great recruitment
Recruitments. It
deals.
was. Yeah. It was great. I thought Bunning had him.
What is up with South Carolina? They got Tennessee guys, they got state guys coaching for them. Crazy down there. Look, let's talk about Carolina's defense. Is this I know you spoke of Tamon, Gregory, but is it sort of like it's time to show out for Des and the other guys, especially since Carolina's gone out and gotten Noah Taylor from Virginia, a guy who I doubt is transferring to North Carolina to sit?
That is a very loud push, Tommy.
Very loud push.
Yes.
By the coaching staff.
That is to say, get it or get it. Get it on or get it on.
That's
What do you
throwing
think, Gregory?
firecrackers at their feet. Let's get it, guys.
What do you think, Gregory? Is your guy is it get along or get along? Come on. Des Evans against South Carolina. What's he do?
You have to show that you're going to play with the energy and like want to and desire, whether or not it actually reciprocates. I mean, we talked earlier this year about how sometimes as an edge rusher, his first step is back. So it can't be that. Even like, especially like on pass rush plays, on actual passing downs, your first step can't be back as an outside linebacker, as an edge rusher, unless you're dropping back into coverage. But he wasn't on most of those times that noticed. So yeah, you just kind of look. The results don't need to be there, I guess, because I mean it relies on a lot of things. But you still need to at least show that you've made significant progress to then carry over into the spring. I imagine these transfers aren't. When is it? I guess when does it take place? Ty Chandler was here in the spring, wasn't he? Do Corey Gaynor and Noah Taylor, will they both be here in the spring? They
Yes,
doesn't
they get
count
here in
as like the
January.
early enrollees, right?
I kept waiting for the SEC
It's a
to figure
transfer,
out.
so a little bit different.
Yeah, I kept waiting to see that Rattler was suiting it up for South Carolina in this game.
Wouldn't that
somehow.
be something if they could transfer mid-season and he
Play.
could show up? I mean, they need him. Regardless if he knows the playbook, they need somebody.
I would
yeah.
take him over who they got. Jason, what kind of audition is going on for some of these guys given a transfer like that? Or is it?
Well, I mean, every game's an audition, and I think a bowl game is always a big audition for everybody as they're moving into the next year. So anybody that's on the roster is trying to. I mean, we were just talking about like, well, what happened between British Brooks in the bowl game and this year, and we talked about in the last time I was on in the IC podcast, we talked about why. If British Brooks was that good, why wasn't he playing? Well, he didn't play as well in the bowl game last year. That's why these auditions matter, right? You only get so many opportunities to demonstrate to the coaching staff that you're the guy. And if you don't do it in the bowl game and then you don't do it in the spring game, then when you've got 5 or 6 other running backs on the roster, it's going to be hard to prove it once you get to camp, and you're not going to get the reps in season. So yeah, this is a big deal for players who are, especially on the younger side, who are auditioning to demonstrate that they should be the dude, going at that spot going into next year, that they should be a guy that's getting more reps, that they should be a guy that's not, that the coaching staff's not trying to go in and get a transfer to replace, all sorts of things. I think there's a lot of motivation there for players who want to take that step forward, and certainly coaches are going to be pushing that as a motivational thing with their players at that level, saying like, look, this is the last film you're going to give us for months here, guys. This is the last taste you're going to give us. Where do you want to be on the depth chart? Where do you want us to, what do you want us to think going into next year in terms of where we should put you? That's going to be a factor. And by the way, as for Des Evans, one of the questions for me, in terms of sacks available in this game is I'm not sure how many times South Carolina is going to throw the football. Right. I mean, given the quarterback situation that they've got, I mean, the starter that they've got, he runs it better than he throws it.
So their running back situation is not much better.
Yeah. And by the way, little trivia, anybody know where Zaquandre White, the running back who opted out, you said he was averaging 6 yards a carry. Anybody know where he started?
Like his college career?
Yeah.
No.
Florida State.
That's correct.
Oh,
he was actually interesting thing. He was actually part of the same recruiting class as Cam Akers. Wow. So it was him, Cam Akers, and Kalen LeBourne were the 3 running backs that they landed in that recruiting class, which if you think about it, that was just an absurd recruiting class of running back talent. And then, Akers left early and Zaquandre White transferred out. There were some other issues and he transferred to JUCO and then to South Carolina and balled out. So good for him for getting things turned around. But that's a guy, when I saw his name pop up earlier this year, I was like, whoa. He's still playing? Because I mean, that was ages ago. And he's managed to really do that. But he's a guy that they don't have now. And he's a guy that's going to be playing in the NFL. And suddenly they don't have that back. But I think if you're Bateman, you've got to be preparing for a quarterback run heavy scheme from South Carolina in this game, that they're probably going to try to run the quarterback and run the 11-man running game to neutralize some things this year or this bowl game.
Shane in the chat said,
I was about to go there.
Last time UNC went against a team like this, Baylor's still running.
So. that is a NCAA bowl record rushing yards that still stands.
And that's going to stand probably for a long time.
I can't believe it's just a bowl record. I mean,
yeah. To Jason's point, though, Nolan, the most passes he's thrown in a game this year is 24. And he's got on the season, he's thrown 6 touchdowns against 1 interception. Before those touchdowns came against Eastern Illinois in the opener. I mean, this is one of those games where Bateman can close the season looking really good against a really bad offense. There's no reason Carolina shouldn't come close to shutting this team out.
Or he could look really bad by allowing them to run all over the field.
Yeah, I hope that doesn't happen for his sake. But yeah, this is one of those games where you'll probably see a legitimate 3-4 set, right? Just going to Jason's point where South Carolina has to be able to run the ball to have any success.
Force that quarterback and those receivers to beat your corners and your secondary and load up in the box. I mean, that's the scheme. That's what you're doing in this game. Bring pressure, load up, and see if they can run the football run the football against your heavy packages. Because I mean, yeah, maybe they hit you for a couple big plays, but you got to think that your offense is going to be able to score, at least say 28 in this game, 30 points. And so, that's going to require 4 or 5 busts from your secondary. Basically, that's the way I'm scheming this. If I'm the defensive coordinator, I'm saying, look, they're going to have to beat my secondary and my corners for long touchdowns 4 or 5 times for us to lose this game. But they are sure as heck not going to run the football on me with this personnel. I'm going to make sure that if they're going to be one dimensional, it's going to be because we couldn't cover them.
Yeah. Tommy, people listening may not know the story, but Zeb Nolan was a graduate assistant coach for South Carolina to start training camp this year. And granted, he played at Iowa State, and then he was behind who was it? Trey Lance at North Dakota State. So he's played at the Power 5 level at Iowa State, of course, but he was a graduate assistant coach back in early August. And then when Luke Doty got hurt, they're like, well, we need somebody, so suit up. And he started a couple games, and I think he ended up starting 4 games, and then they went to the other guys. But he's back in action, so again,
I don't think he's going to be the only guy that's going to play. Right? I mean, he's going to start, but do you think he's going to be the only quarterback that's going to play? I mean, I think
they only have 2.
But I think Gauthier's going to be. I think he's going to play, and that's part of why I think you're going to see some run stuff.
Right. Did you say Gauthier? Isn't that Gautier?
Yes.
I have no idea how they pronounce that.
This has not been our best showing.
This is hooked on phonics.
Is it Gautier? I don't know how he does it. I mean, it's South Carolina. I just figured you pronounced it South Carolina style.
I don't know. They say Beaufort instead of Beaufort. So I'm
like
not
I said,
sure.
Gauthier, right? Gauthier is how the pronunciation guide has it.
Okay, nice. There you go.
You had it right. My bad. I digress
He's trying
again.
To be French.
Gregory, since you're on this game plan podcast, I'm gonna make you go first on predictions.
I think South Carolina's defense will give UNC's offense a fit here. South Carolina holds opponents to like 24 points a game. I don't think UNC. I think it's at 24. I think UNC scores 24, and I think South Carolina's offense can't get anything going. But it's going to be close because UNC's defense isn't necessarily worldly. So I'm going 24-21 UNC.
Jason.
I think Carolina's going to have more success offensively than Junior does here. So I think this is a game that Carolina, the spread I think is 9. And I think Carolina's probably pretty likely to cover that. South Carolina did play better down the stretch. Again, some decent wins down the stretch. I mean, Florida, Auburn, and then, they put up a bagel against Clemson, but that's a pretty dang good Clemson defense. But I think they're going to have a hard time scoring in this game. I don't see them running it all over the field. And I think Carolina is going to be pretty balanced. I think they're going to be able to run the football against that defense, given some of the guys that have opted out. And I think that's going to be the difference. Carolina is going to be able to be balanced with Sam Howell. And I don't think South Carolina is going to be able to be balanced, and they don't have Sam Howell. So I think it's going to be something closer to I think Carolina is probably going to cover in this game. I think it's going to be something like 31-13 in this game, somewhere in there.
Greg Barnes. I'll go ahead and get mine in. One, I'll say I think a butt kicking's coming if they play. I'm not sold that this game's going to happen. And if they don't announce one way or another before midnight tonight, I'm going to eat a hotel room in Charlotte, which does not have me happy. But I believe Carolina is going to train wreck South Carolina if they play the game. And I'm talking like not Virginia Tech bowl game, Mac Brown 97, 98 year, but it's going to be I think to quote Greg Barnes before we went on air, a bloodbath if the game happens. Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, some interesting numbers here. South Carolina has trailed in every game against FBS opponents this year. I don't think that's very good. I'll give them credit for winning 5 of them. They've scored more than 23 points against 2 FBS opponents, one being Missouri, which they scored 28, and then whatever happened against Florida during the disaster that was early November for the Gators. So I don't know if I put a lot of stock in that particular game, but I don't think this offense is very good. I do think the defense is good, but when when they had success late in the year, it was with Brown at quarterback. He is not playing, so we have the Zeb Nolan gentleman playing, and I just think this should be a good opportunity for Jay to have a good performance, even if he should have a good performance against a bad offense. But I think that makes things easier for the offense, and Sam doesn't have to press. And in theory, that should help him take advantage and be willing to go for the simple stuff. And if they have to punt, they have to punt without forcing things. That should allow for more hits. And so I agree with everybody. I think this is going to be a blowout. Spread is 9. I don't understand how it's 9, but I've got North Carolina winning this one 42-14.
Keep in mind that I picked them 12-0 about
Look
three
at
and a half
Greg.
months ago.
That is that's a crazy stat or prediction there, G Biggie.
Take my Greg's the smart one. I'm just gut, and my gut was
Did
half
you guys
wrong.
do a
so
podcast before the Baylor bowl game?
I'm sure we did.
Are there predictions?
yeah.
There? I need to find those.
Yeah, you need to find those. I don't think we were very positive about that one going in, but we did feel like they had a good chance to at least limit them defensively, even though the
I
defense
said they
wasn't
would
very
not
good.
rush for 785 yards.
There is no Art Briles lined up against Jay Bateman on Thursday.
I just feel like this one's going to be a big one for Carolina, and I've been wrong plenty of times before. So if I'm wrong today, folks,
12-0.
I'll see y'all in August of next year.
What do you mean you've been wrong, but many times before? I thought you were 12-0.
Look, Buck Sanders, when he used to host the podcast, he introduced me with an audio clip that had me saying something to the effect of, not that I've ever been wrong before. So, it lives infamously. A couple things to tease. One, without any Carolina basketball game, we won't have a post-game podcast after that one. And we wouldn't have anyway because I'll be on the way to Charlotte. We are having Inside Carolina Live tailgate show there in Charlotte, 1200 South Graham Street. Come out and join us. The show starts at 8:30 in the morning, a little bit early for a tailgate, but we'll be living it up. There's a cornhole tournament out there. There's plenty to do. There'll be plenty to eat. Bring your food, bring your refreshments. Gregory Hall and Greg Barnes will be there. And I'm sure Jason Staples will call in. And so you might see some more. I think Taylor Viplis might show up if he's able. So it's going to be a fun time out there on Graham Street.
Both interns?
Both interns, yes, sir. And it's a complete IC party. I'll have some IC stickers, maybe a couple IC hats, anything you need. Get there. Also sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, as always. Great friends of us, great friends of you, the Inside Carolina Premium subscriber. Christmas is over, but the strive for gear never ends. So Johnny
It's the
T-Shirt.
third day of Christmas now. No, let's be real. Christmas just started.
Yeah, he ain't lying. So get on johnnytshirt.com and order some more stuff. Get everything you need. They've got all the gear you could possibly want. Support them. They're locally owned and operated on Franklin Street. Boys, this has been fun. This is our last game plan podcast, at least till the spring game. Maybe we'll do one for the spring game for the heck of it. But Greg, Jason, Gregory, yeah, we're going to hype this one. 12-0 going into next year. Can't wait for that train to start rolling. Any last words, boys, before we get out of here and reconvene in Charlotte in 2 days, 3 days?
Tommy, is this a must-win game?
I think so.
There you
Greg
go.
Barnes agrees with me.
I think I agree with that. Yeah.
I think this is compared to the other 12 games that have happened, this might be the most must-win game of all of them.
I agree with that. You cannot have a losing record and sell hope. Jason, any last words?
I disagree.
Well, we'll end it on that note. We will be doing day after pod with Jason Staples, Buck Sanders, and myself. Assuming I survive the trip, 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. on Friday morning. It will not be live unless Gregory wants to get up and make it live, but it'll be out on the usual iTunes and YouTube channels. Boys, it's always been fun. Carolina and South Carolina, 11:30 a.m. on Thursday in the Mayo Bowl. We'll see y'all then.